Hi everyone again, I'm very happy to be here today. So my current PhD research is dedicated to the study of role of ancient Egyptian queens in military history, including the use of military symbology in their representation. So today main emphasis will be given to the representation of queens in the scenes of the ceremonial execution of captives, so-called Smites scenes, and the political motives of such depictions. So the representation of victorious domination of the pharaoh over enemies has always been one of the most important themes in royal art, and one of the earliest depictions of the Smites scenes in Tomb 100 at Hierakonpolis, dated to Nakada II, constitutes a reference of emerging royal symbols of power and dominance. Ritual killing of captives has become a well-known practice since the first dynasty and became particularly popular during the New Kingdom as a demonstration of manifestation of divine will in protecting Maat by killing enemies by the king with the support of the gods. And on the examples of Smites scenes of Ramesses II, Heatherly McCarthy divided such scenes into two groups. So emblematic scenes that have symbolic meaning of world dominance of a pharaoh over enemies, and scenes that commemorate real historical events. Emblematic scenes, according to McCarthy, are characterized by a simple compositional structure with a limited number of participants. While narrative battle scenes, you can see, usually include many participants, such as soldiers, troops, elite officials, foreign civilians, and many, many others. So, and they usually indicate specific historical event recognizable in the text and image. However, even emblematic scenes may have been originally based on the actual practice of ritual killing of prisoners as a symbol of the king's victory in war or against chaotic forces, because these cases of public execution of defeated enemies appeared in many texts, for example, in the texts during the reigns of Thutmose I and Amenhotep II. There are several types of Smites scenes. However, today we're focusing on the most frequent representation of the king in human form, with royal regalia preparing to strike a human foreigner with a weapon in his hand. So the Smites scene usually includes three main components: the king, the god, usually one, maybe two, and in whose presence the sacrifice is taking place, and of course the enemy. So the god is usually depicted in front of the king, displaying symbols of power and military dominance. For instance, the god Ptah is occasionally presented in such kind of scenes, standing in front of the king and holding vast scepter, and also other gods, especially Amun-Ra, Ra-Raktin, Montu, usually shown represented a Hapesh sword to the king, killing a bound captive in front of the god. On the contrary, goddesses rarely appeared in Smites scenes and always in emblematic scenes, because goddesses played usually exclusively protective role and usually standing behind the king. So they usually represented as a minor deity in Smites scenes. And in the same case, so queens, when they appeared in such kind of scenes, they usually replaced the goddesses and standing behind the king and raising their hands in protective gesture. A queen frequently wore a high double feather crown with a sun disk, emphasizing their close connection with the goddess Hathor, holding an ankh sign on a flower in their hand. So at least 6 queens of the New Kingdom are known to be depicted in Smites scenes along with their husbands, or were represented also as Smiters themselves. So Erit, Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Ankhesenamun, and Nefertari. At least we have survived evidence of the representations of these queens. So this comparative table demonstrates the type of representations of the six queens in scenes of ceremonial execution. And I divided for like 4 groups as the representation of queens with weapon, without weapon, as Smiters, and other. Other is only for Queen Ankhesenamun, because she appeared in many different scenes that distinguished from the traditional Smiting scenes, but directly related to the same symbolical meaning. And Ankhesenamun was the only queen consort who was shown holding two different types of weapon. It's an arrow and a sword. So the earliest representation of a queen in Smiting scene is Queen Ieret. She appeared in the scene on the Canossa stela dated to regnal year 7 of Thutmose IV. And she's standing behind the king with her title, the daughter of the king and the great king's wife. So she's shown holding a mace. And the king, Thutmose IV, he is about to strike two enemies in front of two Nubian gods, Devon and Ham, who are standing in front of him. And the interesting thing about this representation of Ieret is that Ieret is the second person on this in this image who possesses weapon, so the king and Ieret, but not the male gods in front of the pharaoh. This is very interesting. So the second is Queen Hatshepsut, but here we have some interesting things because Hatshepsut was represented as a smiters, or only the smiters, and here you can see her representation in the shape of Sphinx trampling his enemies, and also the same image appeared in Theban tomb 73, and also in this Theban tomb, Hatshepsut is represented as in a human form as a male king killing his enemy. But despite the fact that Hatshepsut is usually mentioned among queens appeared in Smiting scenes, I think that she must not be considered as a queen in this particular case, because by the time of the creation of reliefs, she had already been crowned as king of Egypt. And so technically she was a king. And that is why her images must be compared only with traditional male royal iconography and not with the queen's one. So another queen is Queen Tia. So she appeared in Smiting scenes with her husband Amenhotep III. And only once, of course, we have just only one her representation with mace on a scarab. And she also appears with her husband, and who's about to strike an enemy on a seal in front of a Syrian ruler. And Silke Roth has stressed that this scene can be attributed to the role of Egyptian royal couple as overlords over much of Syria-Palestine region. And also interesting appearance of Tia is found in the tomb of Amenemhat Thebes. You can see that her statue is standing on the defeated enemy. Is a very unusual thing for the queen. And in the tomb of Heref, you know, is very interesting but very famous representation of Queen Tia in the form of Sphinx trampling female enemies on the decorated throne. So and the next queen is Queen Nefertiti, and with Nefertiti she appeared many times in Smiting scenes as a companion of the king. So she was represented behind her husband King Akhenaten, and also she appeared as a smiters. So you can see, and she's of course the only queen who was represented as female slayer. So because Hatshepsut was represented as a male king, so in this case it was strictly in scope of ancient Egyptian art. So Hatshepsut Nefertiti appeared as a smiter in human form. You can see she's standing under the rays of Aten, and she's about to kill a kneeling female enemy. And on the other scene, she's represented as a sphinx trampling again female enemies. It's very similar to the representation of Queen Tia from the tomb of Heref. And Nefertiti also appeared as a slayer in another ceremonial, many different ceremonial boat procession at Amarna as a slayer with her husband, who Akhenaten was also represented in the same kind of scene. So it was like a double scene with the queen and the king. So Queen Nefertiti, we can see a lot of scenes with very unusual scenes with Queen Nefertiti. So the next queen is Anhisenamun. Is very interesting that Anhisenamun is not well-studied queen. And she appeared in many scenes related to world dominance and with military symbology. So in this particular case, we can see two scenes from the Golden Shrine from the tomb of Tutankhamun, and she's represented in two hunting scenes. So, and one of them, the lower one, we can see that she's sit on a cushion near with her husband. So, because her husband is Tutankhamun. So Tutankhamun he's hunting the birds with bow and arrows, and she, so Anhisenamun, holds an arrow, presenting it to her husband. And you can see she also, with the other hand, she points to the birds that Tutankhamun is, so the birds he has to kill. And the same scene appears also on wooden box from the tomb of Tutankhamun. And here we can see the motive of the killing of animals by the pharaoh in ancient Egyptian art denoted their symbolical representation of king's victory over enemies in zoomorphic shape, and was one of the types of so-called smiting scene. So the scene signifies that Tutankhamun could defeat the enemy only with the help of Anhisenamun, but not by himself. It's a very interesting thing that she played a very crucial role in these kind of scenes. So, and she also, Anhisenamun also appears in more traditional smiting scenes. So you can see on a fragment of gold foil from Kibi 58, she stands behind Tutankhamun. And you can see that she raised her hand in protective gesture, while her husband, Tutankhamun, is about to kill a kneeling enemy. And another presentation of Anhisenamun appears in the scenes of celebration of Opet Festival at Luxor Temple, and here you can see two of these scenes. One of them, she's standing in a kiosk with behind her husband Tutankhamun, and she holds traditionally fly whisk and the onyx symbol. And but on another scene is a very exceptional case. She's not only standing behind the king who is about to kill the enemy, but also she holds a Hapesh sword in her hand. So she presents the Hapesh sword to the king. And this is the interesting point, because such a motive of the offering of weapons by the gods to the ruling king might have symbolized the divine sanction for the starting a military campaign with the divine support. For instance, Kamos receives a Hapesh sword from Amun at the beginning of his campaign against Hyksos, and usually the god Amun was represented with Hapesh to the pharaoh, just like support him in his domination over enemies. So in this situation, the queen clearly assumes the role of a male god, replacing Amun-Ra. So she's also she depicted in front. She's not depicted in front of the king because she's standing behind, but still she represents the symbol of military power, sword Hapesh. So she plays a protective role as a goddess and a supportive role as a male god. And the last queen who was presented in smiting scenes is Queen Nefertari, wife of Ramesses II. So she appears at least 3 times accompanying the king in emblematic smiting scene. And so this is the scenes in the small temple of Abu Simbel. So, and she's standing again behind The king, we don't have any representation of queen holding a mace or any other kind of weapon, so she just plays a very supportive role as a goddess. And Habachi thought that the appearance, a Nefertari appearance in these emblematic scenes emphasized her divinity and important ritual role as a divine counterpart of Ramesses II. So as a chief wife, Nefertari played an important role in the development of the program of deification of Ramesses II and the manifestation of the goddess and the main female counterpart of the ruling king. So there is no much discussion about the representation of queens in these kind of scenes. And all of these cases, I would like to emphasize, they're absolutely exceptional and interesting. So in his study, Robert Marcus suggested that the violin scenes reflect the divine aspect of Great King's wife, closely connected with Queen's manifestation as the goddess Hathor, and her significance for the ideology of kingship as a form of the Eye of Ra. And however, there are other interesting aspects that may have influence on the appearance of such exclusive scenes. First of all, I think that it's very important to understand the meaning of military symbology in ancient iconography and the connection between gender and weapon in public representation of power. According to strict division of labor by sex in ancient Egypt, only men had access to war and political power, since war has always been associated with masculinity as a fundamental notion of what war is and how it works. Weapon played a significant role as a main symbol of power, signifying the dominance over enemies, the physical strength of a king, and his superiority and capability to protect Egypt and maintain order with the help of the gods. That is why we really don't have a lot of representation of queens with weapons, and not only in ancient Egypt, but just in many other cultures. So as was stressed by feminist scholar Marilyn French, every hunting culture created a male religious cult and ritual that entirely excluded women, incorporating mythological base of male power and using weaponry as totems, which were prohibited for women. Consequently, men and women in ancient Egypt were usually represented in art with a set of symbols, signifying gender differences and characteristics of both gender categories, which definite the main aspect of gender inequality and representation of women as physically weaker and inactive, especially in political terms. So queenship simply didn't have symbols of political and military power. However, the assumption of power by women in the case of dynastic crisis, very rare situation, but in the case of the assumption of power by a woman, the assumption of power by women automatically meant the assumption of male symbols of power and masculine features of behavior and representation. So, and first of all, it's weapons and symbol of military dominance. In the majority of cases, the assumption of male symbology by female kings and the use of this kind of symbology in their public representations allow to identify that they changed their political status. And if we look again to the list of the 6 queens, we can see that they have that we can see some similarities between them, excluding Eret and Nefertari, because Nefertari didn't survive Ramesses II, so we know that she was not able to be a king's mother and regent. Eret appeared only at this last year, regnal year of Thutmose IV, regnal year 7, then Thutmose IV, 7 and 8. So Thutmose IV died, and she didn't have a male heir, so she just disappeared from political scene. But other 4 queens, we know they ruled. So, for instance, Hatshepsut, again, she was co-regent of Thutmose IV, but she was crowned king of Egypt. Tia after the death of Amenhotep III, we know there are some theories that she was the regent during the first year of the reign of Akhenaten, but we also know that she was involved in diplomatic correspondence with King Tushratta, Mitannian King Tushratta, and probably she played a significant political role even after death of her husband Amenhotep III. Nefertiti, again, she was a regent and a co-regent with her husband. Then she was crowned king of Egypt and ruled for approximately 3-4 years. And Anhisenam, again, she was co-ruler with Tutankhamun, and after his death, she tried to seize the throne, and she was involved in diplomatic correspondence with Hittite king Suppiluliuma the first. And we know that diplomatic correspondence was one of the main prerogatives of male kings exclusively. So, therefore, it can be assumed that the occurrence of queens in Smitian scenes and the use of masculine military symbols was probably the natural consequence of their political elevation and significance, which might have been demonstrated only through the possession of male symbols of power and dominance, since all 4 sources of power belonged only to male kings without the access for royal women in accordance with the ideology of kingship in ancient Egypt. So thank you so much for your attention. Yes, sorry. Yes, you can have it.
Thank you so much, Olga. Oh, we've just lost a good mic. Together, fab. Thank you. Any questions in the room for Olga? Nothing in the room at the moment. I have a couple, but we can cross over to Zoom first if there's any. Oh, and Canon has one behind me. Any with you, Valentina, first?
Yes, we have some questions. We have a comment and a question. So thank you. Thank you so much, Olga. It was
one of your questions
amazing.
First, and then I'll pass over to Canon, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay.
Of course. Could Nefertiti redefine the legitimate monopoly of coercion, Maat?
Could you repeat the question,
yes,
please, Valentina?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Could Nefertiti redefine the legitimate monopoly of coercion, Maat, meaning Maat?
Yeah, I can read, sorry. Yeah, okay. Yes, about Nefertiti, it's very interesting thing because of course, I didn't have time just to spend more, like to talk more about Nefertiti and many other queens, because I just tried to see like the main features of the representation of queens. So, and of course, she can do that because the representation of Nefertiti in such kind of scenes, because we have not only Smitan scenes, we have many other representation of queens that were out of scope, ancient Egyptian traditional art. So yes, and of course she could do that, and it's there are a lot of things that we can discuss about Nefertiti, but I just wanted to point that all of these cases of her exceptional representation, as well as many other queens, was because Nefertiti, during the reign of her husband Akhenaten, she possessed more political influence than many other queens consort. That is why we can see these very unusual scenes of the representation of queens. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We also have another question if we want to. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The question is, I understand that you have an idea that Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun were both regnal in a way similar to Akhenaten and Nefertiti.
Yes, so about Ankhesenamun, as she is one of my main research interests. Yes, and I think that Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun, they copied many features of co-rulership of Nefertiti and Akhenaten, sorry, because Ankhesenamun and Tutankhamun, they just didn't see any other examples of co-rulership. I mean, any other types of rulership at all, because they were born by like in the family of Akhenaten. So, and I think that for them it was the only survived and only well-known model of reign.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really, really interesting.
We'll just pass over. Canon had a question.
From my back corner here. You mentioned that, like with Nefertiti, she also appears in other scenes that would be unexpected for a queen. I was curious, do you see similar patterns with Nefertari and Tia and these other queens as well? Or is it just the smiting scene that they kind of aren't expected in?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Yes, not Nefertari, but for example, Ankhesenamun, she copied Nefertiti, but I think that we have to study Nefertiti separately, because the reign of Akhenaten was marked with religious reform, and that is why she plays exclusive role for the Egyptian queen. So that is why, of course, we have many scenes that were where appeared only Queen Nefertiti, and in Ankhesenamun, because she was her daughter, so she tried to copy some representation of Nefertiti, but other queens not. I'm not sure, especially about Nefertari and other, because they were not wife of Akhenaten, and they didn't live in the period of religious reform, so with these kind of changes. So thank you so much. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Any last questions in the room? I know lunch has arrived and everyone's suddenly gone suspiciously quiet. Last chance in the room? We've got time for one last question with you, Valentina, if there is anything.
Any other question in the chat?
If not, I have a very, very quick one. I've noticed this morning, a lot of us has been talking about our own research process and trying to find this evidence. And we've all been quite hampered by past terminology, particularly stuff dating from the 19th and early 20th century. Have you found consistent terminology when people are talking about smiting? Is it always called smiting? Is it ever called anything else?
Thank you for the question, because I thought about that when you discussed the terms. Yeah, I have problems with terminology with queens, because when we talk about queens, we use a European term queen, and this term absolutely doesn't reflect the situation in ancient Egypt, because, as I said, like, we can't say queen for Nefertiti and Hatshepsut as different queens, like Ankhesenamun or Nefertari, different queens. So that is why, yeah, I used my own terminology in my PhD research, because I have to make it more clearly what I'm talking about, because queen is just the term for like royal woman, but in different situations, in different periods of history, different royal women, they had different political influence, because we have regions, we have co-rulers, we have queens, special female kings. So that is why for me it's also very important to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everyone, can I have a final round of applause for Olga?